You have been praying for the same thing for a long time, not a few weeks, not a season that felt long but that was objectively brief. A long time, long enough that the original version of the prayer, the one you prayed in the beginning when the expectation was still high and the faith was still warm and the asking felt like it was going somewhere, has been through enough iterations to have changed shape entirely. The prayer that started as a specific, confident, "this is coming" petition has become something quieter and harder to name. Something that is still technically a prayer, but that carries inside it a weight that the original version did not carry. The weight of the times it went unanswered. The weight of the specific disappointments, the moments when the answer seemed closest and then did not arrive. The weight of having believed and kept believing and kept praying and kept showing up and watch the specific thing you were praying for remain exactly as it was. And somewhere in the accumulated weight of all of that, somewhere in the distance between the original prayer and the current one, doubt arrived. Not the dramatic doubt of a person who has abandoned faith entirely. The quieter, more specific, more personally targeted doubt of a person who is still praying, but who has started to wonder. To wonder if the prayer is actually reaching anywhere. To wonder if the specific thing being prayed for is actually coming, or whether the faith that it is coming has been a form of hopeful thinking rather than genuine spiritual discernment. To wonder if God is moving in this specific situation, or whether the silence has been telling them something they have been refusing to hear. That wondering is what brought you here tonight, and I want to talk about it directly, without minimizing it, without dismissing it as simple unbelief, without giving you the theological version of a pep talk that sounds right, but does not reach the actual place where the doubt lives. I want to go there tonight. Stay with me. I want to say something about doubt that I think most of the teaching you have received on the subject has gotten wrong, or at least incomplete. Doubt has been presented in most Christian contexts as the opposite of faith, as the enemy of the prayer life, as the signal that something has gone wrong in the interior, as the thing that needs to be overcome before the faith can function properly again. And there is a dimension of that framework that is true. Doubt that calcifies into unbelief, that hardens into the settled conviction that God does not hear or does not move or does not exist, is not a neutral thing. It produces real consequences in the prayer life and in the spiritual formation and in the relationship with God. But the doubt you are carrying tonight is not that kind of doubt. It is not the doubt of a person who has concluded that God is absent. It is the doubt of a person who is still praying, still showing up, still bringing the request, still refusing to completely release the thread, while privately wondering whether the showing up is producing anything. And that kind of doubt, the doubt of the person who has not stopped praying but who has started to wonder while they pray, is not the opposite of faith. It is faith under pressure. It is the specific, costly, uncomfortable form that faith takes when it has been sustained for long enough without visible confirmation that the sustaining itself has become the act of faith. Because easy faith is not yet the mature form of faith. Easy faith is the faith that believes when the evidence cooperates. Mature faith is the faith that continues when the evidence does not. And the doubt that arrives in the middle of the continued prayer is not the evidence that the faith has failed. It is the evidence that the faith is being forged into something more durable than what it was when it was easy. There is a question I want you to hold through this entire video, not the question that the doubt is asking, which is whether God is moving, but a different question. A question that I think reframes the entire experience of praying through sustained doubt in a way that changes what the doubt means and what the continuing means and what the answer, when it arrives, will mean. The question is this: what if the doubt you are carrying right now is not the obstacle to the breakthrough you have been praying for, but the specific, necessary, faith-forming experience that is preparing you to receive the breakthrough in the form that it is actually coming? What if the breaking down of the easy faith, the faith that needed the visible evidence and the felt confirmation and the regular experiential reassurance that the prayer was working, is the precise preparation for a depth of trust that the easy faith could never have produced? What if God is not withholding the answer because the doubt is present? What if the doubt is present because the answer is closer than it has ever been, and the thing it is going to require to receive it and carry it and steward it well is exactly what the sustained praying through doubt has been building in you? Hold that. Do not answer it yet. We will come back to it, and the answer is going to change something about the way you pray after this video ends. I want to establish something in the very foundation of what we are going to explore tonight, something that I think is the single most important theological truth available to the person who is praying through sustained doubt and who needs something more solid than encouragement to stand on. And it is this: the effectiveness of prayer is not determined by the quality of the faith of the person praying. It is determined by the character of the God being prayed to. I need you to receive that distinction with both hands and hold it carefully, because it changes everything about the warfare of sustained doubt. If the effectiveness of prayer depends on the quality of the faith, on the absence of doubt, on the confidence of the expectation, and on the consistency of the believing, then the person who is praying through doubt is praying from a deficit. Their prayer is less effective than the prayer of the person whose faith is cleaner and whose expectation is higher and whose doubt is less present. And the solution to the problem of doubt-ridden prayer is to fix the faith before the prayer can work properly again. That framework sounds theologically reasonable. It is also not what the New Testament teaches. Well, Mark chapter 9. A father brings his son to Jesus, a son who has been afflicted with a spirit that has been throwing him into fire and water and that has been destroying him since childhood. And Jesus asks the father, "How long has he been like this?" And the father says, "From childhood." And then he says something that is one of the most honest and most theologically significant statements in all of the Gospels. "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can do anything." That is not the language of confident faith. That is the language of a person who has been watching his son suffer since childhood and who has tried everything available to him and who is standing in front of Jesus with the last remnant of a hope that has been through enough disappointment to have acquired the specific qualifier of "if you can." If you can do anything. And Jesus said to him, "If you can." Everything is possible for one who believes. And the father immediately cried out, "I believe. Help my unbelief. I believe. Help my unbelief." That is the prayer of a person who is holding faith and doubt simultaneously. Who is bringing both, the belief and the unbelief, the hoping and the doubting, the continuing to show up and the privately wondering whether the showing up is producing anything, to Jesus at the same time. Not the managed version, the real thing. And Jesus healed the boy. Not after the doubt was removed, not after the father demonstrated a sufficient level of clean faith, in the middle of the "I believe, help my unbelief," in the presence of the simultaneous faith and doubt. The healing came. because the effectiveness of the prayer was not determined by the quality of the Father's faith. It was determined by the character and the power and the compassion of the Jesus the prayer was directed toward. And that Jesus has not changed. He is in this room right now. And the prayer you are bringing tonight, the one that carries both the continuing belief and the private doubt, the both simultaneously, the I believe help my unbelief, is exactly the kind of prayer he has always responded to, because it is honest, and he has always worked with honest. I want to take you now into something that I think is one of the most practically significant and one of the most underexplored dimensions of the theology of prayer, the relationship between the timing of God and the doubt that arrives in the gap between the asking and the answering. Because I think one of the primary generators of the kind of sustained doubt you are carrying tonight is not the absence of faith. It is the presence of a gap, the gap between what was prayed and what has arrived, the gap between the promise and the fulfillment, the gap between the asking in faith and the receiving in evidence. And the longer the gap, the more time that accumulates in the space between the prayer and the answer, the more the doubt has room to move in and to begin making its case. This is not a failure of faith. It is the entirely predictable experience of a person who is praying toward a God whose timing is not synchronized with human expectation and who is working in ways that are not visible from inside the gap. Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 2 through 3. Write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. The revelation awaits an appointed time. The answer has an appointed time, not an arbitrary time, not a random time, not a time that reflects God's indifference to the suffering of the person in the gap. An appointed time, a specific, sovereignly determined, a perfectly calibrated moment that only the God who stands outside of time can see from where he stands, and that will make complete sense from the other side of the gap when the answer finally arrives, and the full picture becomes visible. Though it linger, wait for it. The lingering is acknowledged. The gap is acknowledged. The distance between the asking and the arriving is not minimized or explained away or dressed up in theological language that makes it sound smaller than it actually is. It lingers. And the instruction is to wait, not passive waiting, not the resigned waiting of a person who has given up expecting anything. The active, faith-maintained, continuing to pray, refusing to release the thread waiting of a person who knows, not because the circumstances confirm it, but because the character of God requires it, that the appointed time is coming. It will certainly come and will not delay. Certainly. The certainty is absolute. The coming is guaranteed. The appointed time is fixed. And the gap, however long it has been, however much it has cost, however much doubt it has allowed to move in, is not evidence that the appointed time has been canceled. It is evidence that the appointed time has not yet arrived. And the difference between those two things, though they feel identical from inside the gap, is everything. I want to add one more layer to this foundation before we move into the portraits from Scripture, because I think there is something critically important to say about what God is actually doing in the gap, in the time between the asking and the answering, in the season of sustained prayer through sustained doubt, that most teaching on the subject never addresses with sufficient specificity. The gap is not dead time. The gap is not the waiting room where nothing is happening until the answer arrives and the real activity begins. The gap is the location of the most significant formation that the entire answer-receiving process requires. And I want to be specific about what that formation actually is, because I think the vagueness of most gap theology produces more discouragement than comfort. The first thing the gap forms is the capacity to receive the answer without being destroyed by it. This sounds counterintuitive, but consider the person who receives a significant answer to prayer before they have been formed by the gap that the answer required. The person who receives the relationship before they have been formed into the person the relationship requires them to be. The person who receives the platform before they have been formed into the character that the platform requires to sustain. The person who receives the financial breakthrough before they have been formed into the stewardship that the breakthrough requires to be sustained rather than squandered. The answer without the formation of the gap is often an answer that cannot be held. That slips through unprepared hands, and that becomes the source of a different and deeper problem than the one the prayer was addressing. The gap forms the hands that will hold the answer, slowly, painfully, sometimes imperceptibly, but genuinely. The second thing the gap forms is the testimony. Because the person who receives an answer to a long and doubt-ridden and sustained through everything prayer carries something that the person who received a quick answer cannot carry. They carry the specific, earned, nothing can take it from them certainty of a person who has been in the gap and who found God faithful in it. And that certainty, that bone-deep, gap-forged, doubt-survived certainty is one of the most significant things a human being can carry into the lives of other people who are in their own gaps. The testimony of the person who kept praying through the doubt until the answer came is not just their testimony, it is the specific instrument of faith for every person who is in the same gap and who needs the evidence that the gap ends. God is building that testimony in you right now, in this specific gap, in this specific sustained prayer through sustained doubt. And the testimony that the gap is building is going to be worth every day of the gap it required to produce. The third thing the gap forms is intimacy, because the person who has been in a long gap, who has had nothing but God in the gap, who has been sustained in the gap by nothing visible, who has continued praying in the gap with no confirmation that the praying is reaching anywhere. That person knows God in a way that the person who has never been in the gap does not know Him. They know Him as the God who is faithful in the silence, as the God who sustains in the waiting, as the God who is present in the gap even when the gap produces no felt evidence of His presence. That specific gap-formed, silence-tested knowledge of God is the intimacy that the comfortable seasons cannot produce. And it is the intimacy that the next chapter of your story is going to require you to have. The gap is not punishment, it is preparation, and the preparation is worth the process. Hold on. The appointed time is coming. And what is coming is worth everything the gap has cost you to be ready for it. I want to take you into 3 portraits from Scripture tonight that I think are the most directly relevant and the most practically instructive portraits of people who prayed through sustained doubt, who kept bringing the request in the face of extended delay and repeated disappointment, and the specific erosion of faith that the gap between the asking and the answering produces, and who found that the continuing was the very thing that positioned them to receive what the doubt had been telling them was not coming. The first portrait is Abraham, and I want to take you into his story not from the angle of the triumph, not from the mountain of Moriah where the ram appeared in the thicket, but from the inside of the gap, from the years between the promise and the fulfillment, Because the gap of Abraham is one of the most documented and most honestly described gaps in all of Scripture, and it contains within it every dimension of the doubt-ridden, sustained prayer, keeping going when keeping going makes no sense experience that you are living in right now. God came to Abram, as he was then named, when he was 75 years old. And he said, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great." A great nation. From a man who had no children. From a man whose wife was barren. From a man who was 75 years old, in a culture where the window for producing the biological foundation of a great nation was already well past. And Abram believed God. The text says it explicitly in Genesis 15:6. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. But he believed. He took the promise at its word. He uprooted his life and left his country and his kindred and his father's house and went, as the text says with extraordinary simplicity, not knowing where he was going. Faith in its most elemental and most costly form. Not knowing where he was going, just going. Because God said, "Go." And then the gap opened and stayed open for years, for a decade, for 25 years between the promise and the fulfillment, 25 years of carrying a promise that the biology contradicted and the circumstances denied and the passing time made increasingly implausible. 25 years of the gap between the great nation and the no children. And in the middle of the gap, in Genesis 15, God came to Abram again and said, "Do not be afraid, Abram, I am your shield, your very great reward." And Abram said, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? What can you give me since I remain childless?" That is the language of a man in the gap. That is the language of a person who has been carrying the promise long enough that the gap between the promise and the current reality has become the loudest voice in the room. What can you give me? The doubt is present. The disappointment is present. The specific erosion of the original expectation that the gap produces over 25 years is present. And God did not dismiss it. He did not correct it. He took Abram outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be." He gave him something to look at that was larger than the gap, larger than the 25 years, and larger than the biology and the circumstances and the accumulated weight of the delay. The stars. And Abram believed. Not perfectly. The next chapter contains the Hagar episode, the human attempt to solve the promise through human means, the specific impatience of a person who has been in the gap long enough to start trying to close it themselves. But the believing continued, imperfectly, with doubt, with the Hagar episode and the return to the promise and the continued waiting. And at 99 years old, 24 years after the original promise, God appeared to Abram again and said, "I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless, and I will confirm my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers." And he changed his name from Abram to Abraham, father of many nations, before the Son arrived. Before a single one of the many nations existed. God changed his name to the name that declared the fulfillment as if it had already happened. Because in God's economy, in the place where he stands outside of time and sees the appointed time from above it, it had already happened. And Abraham, who was now 100 years old and whose body was as good as dead, and whose wife Sarah was 90, laughed. The text is honest about the laughter. He fell face down and he laughed, and he said to himself, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old?" He laughed The gap had lasted long enough to produce the specific, involuntary, "this cannot possibly be happening" response of a person who has held a promise for so long that the arrival of the fulfillment feels more absurd than credible. He laughed, and the son was born. And the son was named Isaac, which means laughter. God named the fulfillment after the doubt laugh of the man who had been in the gap long enough to laugh at the promise. He took the evidence of the doubt and made it the name of the answer. I want to take you now to the woman with the issue of blood. We have visited her story before in this channel, but tonight I want to approach her from a specific angle that we have not yet explored. The angle of the sustained doubt that 12 years of unanswered prayer produces, and what she did with it in the moment when Jesus was passing through her town. The text in Mark chapter 5 tells us that she had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. 12 years, every resource exhausted, every available solution tried, every physician consulted, and not only had nothing worked, she had grown worse, not maintained, worse. I need you to sit with the specific theology of that detail for a moment, because it means that her 12 years of seeking a solution to her problem were not 12 years of neutral waiting. They were 12 years of active, resource-depleting, physically deteriorating effort, 12 years of doing everything available to her and watching the doing produce not improvement, but decline. She was worse than when she started, and she had spent everything she had in the process of getting worse. The doubt that would be present in a person in that specific situation after 12 years of deterioration and resource depletion, and the specific disappointment of active seeking that produced active worsening, is not the mild uncertainty of a person who simply has not yet seen confirmation of what they are believing for. It is the deeply earned, entirely reasonable, extensively evidenced doubt of a person who has tried everything and watched everything fail. And yet, when she heard about Jesus, something in her was still alive, still reaching, still capable of one more act of faith in the direction of the one thing she had not yet tried. If I touch even his garments, I will be made well, not if he agrees to see me, not if I can get an appointment, not if I can present my case adequately, if I can just get close enough to touch the edge of his clothes. That is not the bold, confident, mountain-moving faith of a person whose expectation is high and whose doubt is low. That is the last resource, barely a thread. If I can just get close enough faith of a person who has been through 12 years of everything else failing and who is bringing the remnant of the faith that survived it to the one place she has not yet brought it. And the remnant was enough. The touch was enough. The "if I can just get close enough" was enough. 12 years ended in the moment of the most depleted, most doubt-ridden, most last-resort faith she had ever exercised. Not the cleanest faith, not the most confident faith, not the faith that had never wondered whether this was going to work either. The faith that survived 12 years of everything else failing, and that reached one more time before giving up entirely. And Jesus felt power go out from him. He felt the specific touch of the most depleted faith in the crowd, and he stopped, and he turned, and he found her. And he called her daughter, and he said, "Your faith has made you well." Your faith, the 12-year depleted, if I can just get close enough, last resort faith, your faith. He called it faith, not insufficiency. Not the diminished version of faith that should have been stronger. Your faith, the faith you had, the faith that survived everything it survived to reach one more time. Your faith has made you well. I want to bring one more portrait into this section, one that I think speaks with extraordinary precision to the specific experience of praying through sustained doubt while surrounded by voices that are telling you to stop. His name was Bartimaeus. He was a blind man. He was sitting by the roadside near Jericho. And when he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by, he began to cry out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. And he cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." I want to sit with the specific social and relational dimension of what was happening to Bartimaeus in that moment. He was not praying in private. He was not in the quiet of his own prayer closet where the doubt was his only internal conversation partner. He was in public. And the public response to his praying was not encouragement. It was rebuke. Many rebuked him, multiple people, simultaneously and with sufficient forcefulness that the text specifically notes it. The crowd that surrounded the moment of his most desperate and most sustained crying out was a crowd that was telling him to be quiet, to stop, to accept the situation, to not make a scene, to recognize implicitly in the social dynamics of the rebuke that a person in his condition crying out for the attention of Jesus was being presumptuous, was embarrassing himself, was praying for something that was not going to happen and making a spectacle of the praying in the process. Many rebuked him, telling him to be silent, and he cried out all the more. He did not adjust the volume of the prayer in response to the social pressure to be quiet. Nah, he increased it. He cried out all the more. The rebuke did not silence the prayer. It amplified it. Because Bartimaeus had made a calculation, consciously or not, that the discomfort of the social rebuke was less significant than the cost of being silent in the presence of the only opportunity he could see for the thing he had been carrying for his entire life. And Jesus stopped, and he said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." And the text says Bartimaeus threw off his cloak and sprang up and came to Jesus, threw off his cloak. In the culture of the ancient Near East, the cloak of a blind beggar was his most significant material possession. It was his covering, his warmth, his livelihood. He spread it before him to collect the alms of the people passing by. Throwing it off was not a minor gesture. It was the physical declaration of a person who had decided that the cloak, the safety net, the thing that made the current situation survivable, was no longer needed. That the breakthrough was real enough to abandon the survival mechanism before the breakthrough had been confirmed. He threw off the cloak before he could see. He released the safety net before the healing arrived. And Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And Bartimaeus said, "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. I want to leave you with the specific, practical, immediately applicable instruction that the story of Bartimaeus contains for the person who is praying through sustained doubt while surrounded by voices that are telling them to be quiet. Cry out all the more, not less, not quieter, not the adjusted, socially appropriate, not making a scene version of the prayer. The increased, all the more, I do not care who is rebuking me version. Because the voices that are telling you to be quiet, whether they are external voices or the internal voice of the doubt itself, are not the voice of Jesus. And Jesus has not told you to stop. He has not told you the prayer is presumptuous, or that the asking is inappropriate, or that a person in your condition should accept the situation and be silent. He is passing by. And the one thing that gets his attention, the one thing that makes him stop in the middle of the crowd, is the person who cries out all the more when everyone else is telling them to be quiet. Cry out all the more. He is passing by, and he stops for the ones who will not be silenced. I want to go deeper now into something that I think is at the theological center of the experience of praying through sustained doubt, something that most teaching on the subject either avoids entirely or addresses so briefly and so gently that it does not actually reach the place where the doubt lives, and it is the question of what to do with the specific, named, personally targeted doubt that is not about God in general, but about God in your specific situation. Because there are two entirely different kinds of doubt that arrive in the sustained prayer life. The first kind is doctrinal doubt, the uncertainty about the nature of God, the reliability of Scripture, the coherence of Christian theology, the existence and character of the one being prayed to. Now, this is the doubt that most theological teaching addresses, because it is the doubt that has the most obvious theological answer. You examine the evidence, you engage the arguments, you work through the questions with honesty and rigor, and you arrive, if the examination is genuine, at a faith that is more solid for having been examined than it was before the examining began. C.S. Lewis went through this kind of doubt. Francis Collins went through this kind of doubt. Augustine went through this kind of doubt. And in each case, the examination of the doubt produced not the destruction of the faith, but the deepening and the solidifying of it. That kind of doubt has a process, and the process, faithfully followed, produces something extraordinary. But the doubt you are carrying tonight is not primarily that kind of doubt. The doubt you are carrying tonight is the second kind, the specific, personal, situation-targeted doubt that is not about whether God exists or whether God hears prayer in general, or whether God is the kind of God who moves in the lives of His people. You believe all of that. The doubt you are carrying is more specific and more personal and more difficult to address than any of that. The doubt you are carrying is about whether God moves in your specific situation, whether the specific thing you have been praying for is something God intends to provide, not whether the silence in your specific case is the silence of a God who is working in ways you cannot yet see, or the silence of a God who has heard the prayer and whose answer is no, and whose mercy in the silence is that He is giving you time to accept the no before it is declared more explicitly. That is the doubt that lives in the gap, the specific, personally targeted, this situation, this prayer, this person doubt. And it is harder to address than the doctrinal kind, because it does not have a theological answer that can be applied directly and definitively. It has a theological framework within which to hold the uncertainty, and that framework, received and applied correctly, changes the experience of the doubt even when it does not resolve the specific question the doubt is asking. And that framework is what I want to give you tonight. The theological framework for holding the specific, personal, situation-targeted doubt begins with the nature of God's knowledge. Not His power, though His power is relevant. Not His willingness, though His willingness is relevant. His knowledge, His specific, complete, nothing hidden, already seeing the end from the beginning knowledge of your situation in particular. Isaiah chapter 46 verses 9 and 10. I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things not yet done, saying my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose, declaring the end from the beginning. God is not in the gap with you hoping that things work out. He is not in the gap with you watching the situation develop and adjusting His response based on how the circumstances unfold. Then He is standing outside of the gap, outside of time entirely, seeing the beginning and the end simultaneously, seeing the prayer and the answer in the same moment, seeing the asking and the arriving as a single reality rather than as the two poles of a gap that he is bridging in real time. And from that position, from the position of the one who sees the end from the beginning, who declares from ancient times things not yet done, whose counsel shall stand and who will accomplish all his purpose, the silence in your specific situation is not the silence of uncertainty. It is the silence of the one who is working in the appointed time that he can see and that you cannot. And the specific thing that this theological framework does for the person in the gap is not give them certainty about the specific answer that is coming. It gives them certainty about the specific God who is working toward the answer. The certainty shifts from the outcome to the one who is determining the outcome, and the certainty about the one who is determining the outcome, grounded in the character of the God who declares the end from the beginning and whose counsel stands, is sufficient to sustain the praying even when the outcome is uncertain, because you are not praying toward a God who is figuring it out as he goes. You are praying toward the God who already knows, who already sees the appointed time, who is already working in the gap toward what only he can currently see. And what he can see is worth the gap it is taking to arrive. The specific thing you have been praying for, whatever it is, to however long the gap has been, is in the hands of the God who sees the end from the beginning. And the God who sees the end from the beginning has not lost track of the appointed time. He has not forgotten the prayer. He has not revised his counsel in response to the length of the gap. His counsel stands. He will accomplish all his purpose, and his purpose for your specific situation, for the specific prayer that has been in the gap for this long, is not the worst-case scenario that the doubt has been suggesting. It is the end that he has already seen from the beginning. And the end he has seen is worth every day of the gap it is taking to arrive. I want to take you now into the specific, practical, immediately applicable dimension of what it means to pray through sustained doubt rather than waiting for the doubt to resolve before resuming the prayer. Because I think one of the most damaging pieces of implicit advice that believers receive in the context of doubt, advice that is never stated explicitly but that is communicated clearly through the theological culture of most Christian communities, is that the prayer should be suspended until the doubt is resolved. That the right posture in the presence of significant doubt is to step back from the specific request and to work on the faith before returning to the asking. That the doubt-ridden prayer is somehow less valid, less likely to be received, not less spiritually appropriate than the prayer that is offered from a cleaner and more confident faith position. And the damage this implicit advice does to people who are in the gap, who are carrying both the request and the doubt simultaneously, and who receive the message that the carrying of the doubt disqualifies the carrying of the request, is the additional weight of having been told that the very honesty of their interior state is the obstacle to the answer they are seeking. I want to dismantle that advice completely, not with a general encouragement to pray more confidently, with the specific, documented, unambiguous testimony of Scripture that the prayer which carries the doubt is not a lesser prayer than the prayer that does not. It is a different prayer. And in some ways, in the ways that matter most to the God who values honesty over performance, it is the more significant prayer, because it costs more. Because it is offered not from the comfort of a faith that does not need to choose to believe, but from the specific, deliberate, against everything the doubt is, suggesting decision to direct the prayer toward God anyway. The Father in Mark chapter 9 who said, "I believe, help my unbelief," received the miracle, not after the unbelief was resolved, in the presence of it. The specific, honest, both simultaneously prayer, "I believe and I need help with the part that does not," was the prayer that Jesus responded to, because the honesty was the faith, the bringing of both, the belief and the doubt, the praying and the wondering, the continuing and the privately questioning whether the continuing is producing anything to Jesus rather than managing them privately, was the act of faith that produced the response. And I want to say something specific about the relationship between honest prayer and the character of God that I think changes everything about how you approach the prayer in the presence of the doubt. God does not need your prayer to be cleaned up before He can receive it. He does not need the doubt removed before the prayer can land. He does not need the managed, performance-appropriate, theologically correct version of what you are carrying. He needs the real version. The Father of the afflicted Son gave Him the real version, I believe. Help my unbelief, both, simultaneously, without managing the unbelief out of the prayer before presenting it. Vat and the real version, the unmanaged, both simultaneously, "This is actually where I am" version, produced the response that the managed version would never have reached, because Jesus responded to the honesty. He has always responded to the honesty. And the prayer you are carrying tonight, with the doubt inside it and the continuing inside it and the "I believe, help my unbelief" inside it, is the honest version. And the honest version is the one He responds to. Bring it tonight, exactly as it is, with the doubt still in it, with the gap still present, with the appointed time not yet visible, and the evidence not yet confirming, and the continued praying feeling less like confident faith and more like the stubborn refusal of a person who has decided that stopping is not an option. Bring that, all of it. He receives it. And He has always received it. And the receiving of it tonight in this specific prayer, with the doubt still present, is going to do something, not remove the gap, but shift something in the interior that makes the continuing possible in a new way. A way that is less dependent on the feeling of progress and more rooted in the character of the God who declares the end from the beginning and whose counsel stands. Come, bring the real thing. He is ready. Now I want to pray with you, and I want to pray in the specific, honest, both simultaneously way that the Father of the afflicted Son prayed, not the cleaned up version, not the prayer that pretends the doubt is not present in order to present a more spiritually acceptable petition, the real version, the "I believe, help my unbelief" version, the prayer that carries both the faith and the doubt into the presence of the God who receives both, who has always received both, and who responds to the honesty of the bringing rather than the quality of the faith that accompanies it. Before we begin, I want you to do something. Think of the specific thing, the specific, named, particular request that has been in the gap the longest. The one that started as a confident petition and that has been through enough iterations and enough disappointment and enough sustained delay that it has acquired the specific weight of the gap inside it. Think of it. Name it to yourself right now, not out loud, not in the comments, just in the interior where God already knows it and has always known it. Hold it in your mind as we begin. Because this prayer is not a general prayer for the general person in the general gap. It is the specific prayer for the specific request that the specific person in this room has been carrying for the specific amount of time that the gap has required. Hold the specific thing and bring it into this prayer. Open your hands. Let the palms face upward. You are not performing confidence you do not currently feel. You are bringing what is actually in your hands, the specific, gap-worn, doubt-carrying, still not released request, to the God who made the hands that are holding it and who has been watching the holding for the entire duration of the gap. Father, we come to you right now with the specific thing, not the general prayer. The specific, named, particular request that has been in the gap the longest. The one that we have prayed in faith and prayed in doubt and prayed in everything between. The one that we have threatened to release and then held on to again. The one that has survived everything the gap has done to it. The disappointments, the near misses, the moments when the answer seemed closest and then did not arrive, the accumulated weight of the sustained delay, and that is still here, still in our hands, and still being brought. We bring it to you right now, with the faith and the doubt inside it simultaneously, with the I believe and the help my unbelief held together in the same prayer at the same time. Not the managed version, the real thing, the one that has been through the gap. We bring it, and we believe, by the specific gap formed, nothing easy about it, choice to believe, that you receive it. That the bringing of it to you with the doubt still present is not less valid than the bringing of it without the doubt. That the Father who said, I believe, help my unbelief, received the miracle. And that you are the same God, who has not changed, who responds to the honest bringing rather than the performance of a confidence that is not currently present. We bring the real thing. Receive it, Father, as you have always received the real thing. Father, I want to pray now with specific language over the specific people who are in this room tonight, because they are not here with a general prayer in a general gap. They are here with a specific prayer in a specific gap that has a specific name and a specific history and a specific cost. And I want to bring the specific before you. I pray for the person who has been praying for healing. The specific named physical condition that has persisted through the praying. The diagnosis that did not change after the prayer. The symptom that returned after what seemed like improvement. The body that has not responded to the faith that was brought to it in the confident early days of the prayer, and that has continued to not respond through the less confident subsequent days. Lord, I bring that specific prayer to you right now, not the general prayer for healing in the abstract, the specific prayer for the specific body of the specific person who has been carrying this for this long. And I declare over that body, by the authority of Isaiah 53:5, by the stripes of Jesus Christ, by the blood that was shed for the healing of every condition that any human body has ever carried, that the healing is coming. Not because the faith that accompanies this prayer is sufficient, because the God this prayer is directed toward is sufficient, and the God this prayer is directed toward is Yahweh Rapha, the Lord who heals, not the Lord who heals sometimes, not the Lord who heals when the faith is clean enough, the Lord who heals, present tense, active tense. His very name is the declaration of what he does, and the healing that has not yet been visible in the physical realm is already accomplished in the spiritual one. The appointed time of its manifestation in the body is coming, and the prayer that has been prayed through the doubt and through the gap and through every discouraging day between the first asking and this moment has been heard. From the first day, every word of it, in the golden bowl, before the throne. And the healing that those prayers have been reaching toward is approaching the appointed time of its arrival. Hold on, keep praying. The body that God made for the life he gave is being restored in his time. in his way, but actually, genuinely coming. Father, I pray for the person who has been praying for a relationship, the marriage that has not arrived, the reconciliation that has not happened, for the restoration of a broken relationship that has resisted every attempt at repair. The specific human connection, the spouse, the child, the parent, the friend, that has been the subject of sustained, faithful, often doubt-ridden prayer for longer than the person carrying it thought they were capable of sustaining. Lord, I bring that specific relational prayer to you right now. The name that is in the prayer, the specific person, the specific relationship, the specific brokenness or absence or distance that the prayer has been addressing. And I declare, by the character of the God who sets the lonely in families, who reconciles the estranged, who brings the prodigal home, who restores what the locust has eaten, that the prayer has not been in vain. The specific, named relational answer that this person has been praying toward is in the hands of the God who sees the end from the beginning. And the God who sees the end from the beginning has not lost track of the appointed time of its arrival. The relationship is not lost. The reconciliation is not impossible. The return is not foreclosed. The God who is working in this specific relational situation is working toward something that only He can currently see from where He stands. And what He can see is worth the gap that the praying through the doubt has required. Hold on. Keep praying. The appointed time is coming. Father, I pray for the person who has been praying for a prodigal, the child who walked away, the spouse who left, the sibling who went to the far country and who has not yet turned around, the specific person, beloved, named never out of the prayers, who has been the subject of the most sustained and the most doubt-tested intercession of this person's entire prayer life. Lord, I want to speak specifically to the intercessor tonight, the one who has been praying for someone else, carrying the prayer for the prodigal with the same faithfulness and the same doubt and the same gap-tested, continuing through everything persistence that the person praying for their own situation carries. Your intercession is not in vain. The prayers for the prodigal are in the golden bowl, everyone. I prayed in faith and prayed in doubt and prayed at 3 in the morning when the praying felt like it was going nowhere, and prayed in the quiet moments when something shifted briefly, and prayed again in the long stretches when nothing shifted at all. All of them in the bowl before the throne, and the God who set the father in the prodigal parable watching the road, who made the watching the primary activity of the waiting father, is watching the road for your prodigal right now. The turn is coming. The moment of coming to himself, the otetehora of the prodigal's return, is approaching. Not because the intercession has finally accumulated to a sufficient quantity, because the appointed time is approaching. And the prayer that has been sustaining the intercession through every doubt-ridden day of the gap is the instrument that has been participating in the drawing of the prodigal toward the turn. Your prayer is working. It has always been working. And the prodigal who does not yet know they are being prayed home is closer to the turn than the gap has been suggesting. Hold on. Keep praying. The road is being watched, and the Father is already running in His direction. Father, I pray now for the person whose doubt has arrived through the specific, devastating experience of a prayer that appeared to be answered and then was not. The healing that came, and then the condition returned. The relationship that was restored, and then broke again. The door that opened and then closed. The breakthrough that arrived and that was followed by a setback that felt more crushing than the original situation, because the hope of the breakthrough had made the return to the original situation worse rather than better. Lord, that specific experience, the answered prayer that seemed to reverse, is one of the most faith-testing experiences available to a human being, because it produces a specific doubt that is different from the doubt of the never-answered prayer. The doubt of the reversed answer carries the additional weight of having been given a reason to believe, and then having that reason apparently removed. And the conclusion that the specific, personal, targeted doubt draws from the reversed answer is not just that the prayer is not working, it is that the praying is producing something that is worse than not praying, that the hope generated by the apparent answer made the subsequent disappointment more acute, that the safest posture going forward is not to believe too much so that the reversal cannot cost as much the next time. That level of doubt requires a specific response, not the general encouragement to keep praying. The specific, targeted, directly addressed response to the specific wound that the reversed answer created. And the response is this: the reversal is not the final word. In the story of Lazarus, the man who was sick and who died and whose sisters had prayed and who was 4 days in the tomb when Jesus arrived, the situation had passed through every stage of what the doubt would call irreversible. He was sick. He died. He was buried. He was 4 days in the tomb, past the point where first-century Jewish tradition believed the spirit had finally departed, and the situation was definitively final. 4 days, irreversible by every available measure. And Jesus stood at the tomb and said, "Take away the stone." And Martha said, "Lord, by this time there is an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. By this time there is an odor." That is the language of a person who has watched the reversal happen, who prayed for the healing, who watched the deterioration continue, who was told Jesus was coming, who waited for Jesus to arrive and watched her brother die while waiting, and who is standing at the tomb trying to prevent what feels like the additional indignity of a resurrection attempt that is going to fail in front of everyone. And Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed you would see the glory of God?" And they took away the stone, and Jesus prayed, and he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, the reversal of the reversal. The situation that had passed through sick and dead and buried and 4 days in the tomb, and by this time there is an odor, reversed, not partially, completely, come out. The prayer that seemed to have been answered and reversed was not the final word on the situation. The tomb was not the final word. The 4 days was not the final word. The odor was not the final word. The come out was the final word. And the God who called Lazarus out of the tomb is the same God who is present in the specific, reversed, apparently final situation that you have been praying about. The reversal is not the final word. Come out is still available. The stone can still be taken away. And the God who sees the end from the beginning has not revised his counsel in response to the 4 days. His counsel stands. He will accomplish all his purpose. And the specific, named particular purpose that he has for the situation that has gone through every stage of what the doubt calls irreversible, that purpose is not canceled by the reversal. It is being accomplished through it, in ways that only the end from the beginning God can see from where he stands. Hold on. Keep praying. The final word has not yet been spoken, and the final word is not what the reversal is saying. The final word is come out, and it is coming in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. If something shifted during that prayer, if the weight of the specific thing you brought into this prayer feels even fractionally different than it did when you started this video, if the gap feels even slightly less total, if the doubt that has been the loudest voice in the room during the sustained prayer has become even marginally quieter in the presence of the God who receives the "I believe, help my unbelief," type "I am still praying" in the comments right now. Not because the answer has arrived, not because the gap has closed, not because the doubt is gone or the evidence has confirmed or the appointed time has made itself visible. Because you are still here, still bringing the specific thing, still refusing to release the thread, despite everything the gap has done to make releasing it feel like the most reasonable response. Still choosing by the specific, costly, against everything the doubt is saying decision to direct the prayer toward the God who receives the honest version rather than the managed one. Type it. I am still praying. Let the continuing be witnessed. Let it be said in a space outside of the silent interior where it has only been held privately, where the doubt has had the most access to it, where it has been most vulnerable to the suggestion that the continuing is pointless. Because there is something that happens when the person who has been sustaining a prayer through sustained doubt says out loud, in a space where other people can witness it, I am still praying. The declaring of it gives it more weight than it has when it is only held inside. The witnessed continuing is harder to surrender than the private continuing. And the person reading that comment at 2 a.m. from inside their own gap, with their own specific thing that has been in the gap for their own specific duration, needs to see that someone else is still praying, needs the evidence that the continuing is possible, needs the testimony that the gap does not always produce the giving up, that some people, specific, real, broken and chosen people who have been through everything the gap produces, are still bringing the specific thing to the God who receives it. Let your I am still praying be that testimony tonight. Let the community of the broken and the chosen witness the specific, costly, gap-tested, doubt-survived decision to keep going. Type it. Let it be witnessed. Now let me answer the question I asked you at the very beginning of this video. You've been holding it through everything we explored together, through the theology of the I believe, help my unbelief, through Abraham's 25 years and the woman's 12 years and Bartimaeus crying out all the more when the crowd rebuked him, through the God who declares the end from the beginning and whose counsel stands, through the gap that forms the capacity to receive the answer and the testimony that only the gap can build, and the intimacy with God that only the sustained praying through sustained doubt can produce. The question was this: what if the doubt you are carrying right now is not the obstacle to the breakthrough you have been praying for, but the specific, necessary, faith-forming experience that is preparing you to receive the breakthrough in the form that it is actually coming? Here is the answer. It is. The doubt is not the obstacle. The doubt is the formation. The gap-tested, doubt-survived, continuing through everything faith that has been produced by the sustained praying through the sustained doubt is not the diminished version of the faith that existed before the doubt arrived. It is the more advanced version, the more durable version, the version that has been through enough to be trusted with what is coming. Because the answer that is approaching the appointed time of its arrival, the specific named particular answer to the specific named particular prayer that has been in the gap for this long, is going to require a person to receive it and carry it and steward it well. And the person who receives a significant answer to prayer without having been formed by the gap that the answer required is a person who is not yet prepared for what the answer carries. The gap forms the preparation, the doubt, survived, prayed through, brought honestly to the God who receives the honest version, forms the character that the answer requires to be sustained. Abraham laughed when God told him Sarah would bear a son, and God named the son after the laughter. The evidence of the doubt became the name of the answer, and the person who has been laughing through the gap, or weeping through it, or doubting through it, or crying out all the more through it while the crowd rebuked the prayer, that person is being prepared. The gap is not punishment, it is preparation. And the preparation is worth every day of the gap it required to produce. The answer is approaching the appointed time. The appointed time is fixed. The counsel of the God who sees the end from the beginning stands. And what he has seen from the beginning, the specific, appointed, end of the gap answer to the specific, named, gap-tested prayer, is worth everything the gap has cost you to be ready for it. I want to leave you with something specific and solid to carry into the days that follow this video. Because the gap does not close because you watched a video. The doubt does not disappear because a prayer was prayed. The appointed time does not arrive because you typed, "I am still praying" in the comments. The continuing is still required. The showing up is still required. The bringing of the specific thing to the God who receives the honest version is still required. Tomorrow and the day after, and every day until the appointed time makes itself visible, and the gap closes, and the end that God has seen from the beginning becomes the thing that you can see from inside time. And I want to give you 3 specific things to carry into the continuing. 3 things that are solid enough to hold when the doubt is loudest and the gap is most discouraging and the prayer feels most like it is going nowhere. The first is Habakkuk 2:3. Write it down, for the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. The appointed time, fixed, certain, coming. The certainty is not contingent on the quality of the faith that is doing the waiting. It is contingent on the character of the God who set the appointed time. And the character of the God who set it is the character of the one who declares the end from the beginning and whose counsel stands. Write it down. But put it somewhere you will see it on the mornings when the gap is most discouraging and the doubt is loudest and the prayer feels most like it is going nowhere. The revelation awaits an appointed time. It will certainly come, and it will not delay past the appointed time. Not one day, not 1 hour, at exactly the right moment. Coming. The second thing is Mark 9:24, I believe. Help my unbelief. The prayer you are allowed to pray in the presence of the doubt. The prayer that Jesus responded to. Not the cleaned up version, the real version, the both simultaneously version. I believe and I need help with the part that does not. That prayer is valid. That prayer reaches. That prayer is received by the same Jesus who received the father of the afflicted son and healed the boy in the middle of the I believe, help my unbelief. You are allowed to pray that prayer. You are allowed to bring the doubt into the prayer rather than managing it out of the prayer before presenting the petition. He receives the honest version. He has always received the honest version, and the honest version, with the doubt still in it, and the faith still fighting, and the both simultaneously still present, is the prayer that he is most directly responding to right now. Pray that prayer. every day that the gap requires it. In the morning when the faith is quietest, and in the evening when the doubt is loudest, and in the midnight when nothing is moving, and in the specific moments when the prayer feels most like talking to an empty room. I believe, help my unbelief. He hears it, he has always heard it, and he receives it as faith. Because the bringing of the honest thing in the presence of the doubt, in the middle of the gap, with the appointed time not yet visible and the evidence not yet confirming, is faith. The most mature and the most costly and the most extraordinarily valued form of faith. The third thing is the simplest. Bartimaeus cried out all the more. When the crowd rebuked him, when the voices around him said, "Be quiet, stop making a scene, accept the situation, the prayer is not going to work," he cried out all the more. Do that. Whatever is rebuking the prayer right now, whether it is the external voices of people who have stopped believing it is coming, or the internal voice of the doubt that has been in the gap long enough to start sounding reasonable, cry out all the more, increase the volume, intensify the persistence, and not because the louder prayer is more effective than the quiet one, but because the decision to cry out all the more in the face of the rebuke is the declaration that the rebuke has not won, that the silence has not been accepted, that the continuing is real and the believing is real, and the God who stops for the ones who will not be silenced is close enough to hear the all the more. He is passing by. He is always passing by, and he stops for the ones who cry out all the more. Cry out. Come back tomorrow and cry out again. The appointed time is coming, and what is coming is worth every day of the gap and every doubt it carried and every all the more it required. Come back tomorrow. He is still passing by, and he has not stopped stopping for the ones who will not be silenced. God bless you. See you later.